Emma Carter had always been a fighter. Life hadn't given her much of a choice. A single mother raising two energetic boys, she juggled odd jobs to make ends meet in the small mountain town where they lived. Her days were long, filled with laundry, school runs, and late-night shifts at the diner. But despite the chaos, Emma found solace in one simple pleasure: hiking through the woods near her home. The forest was her sanctuary, a place where the noise of life faded into the rustling leaves and chirping birds. On weekends, when her sons were busy playing soccer or visiting friends, Emma would pack a thermos of tea and take long walks along the winding trails. She loved the crisp air, the earthy scent of pine needles, and the way sunlight filtered through the canopy above. It was here, surrounded by nature, that she felt most alive. One chilly autumn afternoon, as dark clouds gathered overhead, Emma decided to gather firewood before the rain hit. The weather forecast had warned of an approaching storm, and she knew it would be days before she could venture out again if she didn't stock up now. With a woven basket slung over her arm, she ventured deeper into the woods than usual, following a path less traveled. As she bent down to pick up a sturdy branch, a faint sound stopped her in her tracks. At first, she thought it might be the wind whistling through the trees or perhaps an animal scurrying nearby. But then she heard it again, a soft, muffled groan. It was human, and it was coming from somewhere close. Her heart raced as she turned toward the source of the noise. Pushing aside thick bushes and stepping over roots, she followed the sound until she stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. Beneath a pile of damp leaves and loose dirt lay what appeared to be a hand. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. For a moment, all she could do was stare, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Then, slowly, she knelt beside the mound of earth and began brushing away the debris with trembling hands. As more of the figure emerged, she realized it wasn't just a body, it was a person. A man barely conscious, his face pale and streaked with mud, his lips cracked and dry. "Oh my God," Emma whispered, panic rising in her chest. "Hold on, I'm going to get you out." Without hesitation, she dug furiously with her bare hands, scraping away layers of dirt and leaves. The rain started falling lightly at first, then heavier, turning the ground beneath her feet into slippery mud. Each movement became harder, but Emma refused to stop. She clawed at the earth until her fingers bled, driven by sheer determination. Finally, after what felt like hours, she managed to uncover enough of the man's torso to pull him free. He was weak, barely able to lift his head, but he was alive. His breathing was shallow, his eyes fluttering open for brief moments before closing again. Emma wrapped her jacket around him and cradled his head in her lap, shielding him from the rain as best she could. "Stay with me," she urged, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You're safe now. Just stay awake." The man murmured something unintelligible, his voice raspy and strained. Emma leaned closer, straining to hear. "What did you say?" she asked gently, brushing wet hair from his forehead. He swallowed, hard, his gaze locking onto hers with startling intensity. "Don't trust them," he whispered, his words barely audible over the patter of raindrops. Then his eyes rolled back, and he slipped into unconsciousness. Emma's stomach churned. Who was this man? Why had someone buried him alive? And who were they? Questions swirled in her mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. The storm was worsening, and the man needed help. Immediately. Summoning every ounce of strength, Emma hoisted him onto her back, supporting his weight as best she could. Step by agonizing step, she carried him back toward her cabin, her muscles screaming in protest. By the time she reached the edge of the woods, her clothes were soaked, her legs felt like jelly, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But she pressed on, fueled by adrenaline and an unshakable sense of purpose. When she finally arrived home, dripping water onto the wooden floor, her boys looked up from their homework with wide eyes. "Mom, what happened?" her eldest son Jake asked, jumping to his feet. "No time to explain," Emma said quickly, lowering the man onto the couch. "Go grab some blankets and towels. Hurry." As her sons scrambled to help, Emma worked tirelessly to warm the stranger, cleaning his wounds and forcing small sips of water past his chapped lips. She didn't know who he was or why fate had brought him to her doorstep, but one thing was certain. Saving him had changed everything. For both of them. And deep down, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Over the next few days, Emma devoted herself to nursing the mysterious stranger back to health. Her small cabin became a makeshift recovery room, with blankets piled high on the couch and bowls of warm soup simmering on the stove. The man was weak, his body battered and bruised from whatever ordeal he had endured. But as the color slowly returned to his cheeks and his breathing grew steadier, Emma noticed something else about him. His eyes. They were sharp, intelligent, and carried a weight that spoke of secrets too heavy for one person to bear. On the third day, when the man finally seemed strong enough to talk, Emma sat down beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She had so many questions, but she didn't know where to start. Who was he? Why had someone tried to kill him? And what did he mean when he whispered those chilling words? Don't trust them. Thank you, the man said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was hoarse but sincere. You saved my life. Emma nodded, unsure how to respond. I couldn't just leave you there, she said simply. Anyone would have done the same. He gave her a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Not everyone, he murmured. After a pause, he added, My name is Victor Langston. For a moment, Emma thought she must have misheard him. Victor Langston? The name sounded familiar, like something she'd read in a newspaper or seen on TV years ago. Then it hit her, a tech billionaire who had vanished without a trace after being accused of embezzling millions. Some people believed he was dead. Others thought he'd faked his disappearance to escape justice. Either way, he was supposed to be gone. You're Victor Langston? Emma asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Victor nodded, his expression grim. The very same, though I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing these days. Emma stared at him, trying to reconcile the frail man before her with the larger-than-life figure she remembered from headlines. He looked nothing like the polished, confident billionaire portrayed in photos. His hair was unkempt, his face gaunt, and his clothes, what little remained of them, were torn and filthy. Yet there was no mistaking the intelligence in his gaze or the quiet authority in his tone. What happened to you? Emma asked cautiously. Why were you buried alive? Victor hesitated, his eyes darting toward the window as though checking for unseen threats. For a long time he said nothing, leaving Emma wondering if he would answer at all. Finally he sighed and leaned back against the cushions, his face etched with exhaustion. It's complicated, he began. A lot of people wanted me dead. Or, worse, when I disappeared, I thought I'd left everything behind. My money, my enemies, my past. But some things can't stay buried forever. Emma listened intently as Victor recounted fragments of his story. Years ago, he explained, he had built a fortune by creating cutting-edge technology that revolutionized industries. But success came at a cost. Greedy investors, jealous rivals, and even former friends turned against him, accusing him of stealing their shares and manipulating markets. Faced with lawsuits and public scrutiny, Victor decided to disappear rather than fight battles he knew he couldn't win. I faked my death, he admitted. It wasn't easy, but it worked. For a while. I lived quietly, off the grid, until someone found out I was still alive. They didn't care about revenge or justice. All they wanted was access to what I'd hidden. And what exactly did you hide? Emma pressed, curiosity getting the better of her. Victor's jaw tightened, and he glanced at her sons who were playing quietly in the corner. Lowering his voice, he leaned closer. Enough to make anyone desperate. Billions, stashed away in accounts no one could touch. But it's not just about the money. It's about power, the kind of power that corrupts everyone it touches. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just some rich man's drama, this was dangerous territory. She had dragged her family into something far bigger than she'd imagined, and the thought terrified her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "You barely know me." Victor met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture meshama. As the days passed, Victor grew stronger, but the tension in Emma's cabin only deepened. The revelation about his identity, and the billions he had hidden, hung heavy in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Emma found herself torn between gratitude for saving his life and fear of what his presence might bring to her family. Her boys, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, treated Victor with a mix of curiosity and kindness. They brought him cups of tea, asked him questions about his adventures, and even tried teaching him their favorite card games. To them, he was just another guest. A mysterious one, perhaps, but harmless enough. But Emma knew better. Every time she caught Victor staring out the window or pacing quietly in the corner, she felt the weight of his secrets pressing down on her. He rarely spoke about his past, and when he did, it was always in vague, cryptic terms. Still, little by little, pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Emma sat by the fireplace with Victor, the flickering flames casting long shadows across the room. She decided it was time to confront him, not just about his enemies, but about the choices she and her family were being forced to make. "Victor," she began hesitantly, "you said people are hunting you because of the money. What happens if they find you here? What happens to us?" Victor didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared into the fire, his face illuminated by its orange glow. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and measured, as though he were choosing each word carefully. "They won't stop until they get what they want," he said grimly. "And they'll do whatever it takes to get it. That includes hurting anyone who gets in their way." Emma swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. "So why come here? Why involve me and my kids in this mess?" Victor turned to look at her, his expression softening. "Because I didn't have a choice," he admitted. "When I escaped, I couldn't think straight. I ran blindly into the woods hoping to lose them, but fate brought me to you. And now?" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Now, I don't know what to do next." Emma studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of deceit or manipulation, but all she saw was vulnerability, a man who had spent years running from his demons, only to find himself trapped once again. Despite everything, she couldn't help but feel sorry for him. "You keep talking about this money," she said slowly. "But why does it matter so much? Isn't there more to life than wealth and power?" Victor let out a bitter laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You'd think so, wouldn't you? But the truth is, money changes people. It corrupts them. It makes them believe they're untouchable. And the people chasing me, they're not after the cash itself, they're after control. With that kind of money, they could buy governments, armies, anything they wanted." Emma frowned, struggling to wrap her mind around the enormity of what he was saying. It sounded like something out of a movie, not real life. Yet the fear in Victor's eyes told her it was all too true. "What are you going to do?" she asked finally. "If they're really coming for you, we need a plan." Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "There's only one way to end this," he said firmly. "I need to recover the funds before they do. If I can access the accounts, I can disappear again. For good this time. But I can't do it alone. I need your help." Emma blinked in surprise. "My help? What could I possibly do?" "You're resourceful," Victor replied. "You've already proven that by saving my life. Besides, you know these woods better than anyone, and—" He hesitated, glancing toward the bedroom where her son slept. "I trust you, more than I've trusted anyone in years." Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. Trust was a big word, especially coming from someone like Victor. She wanted to believe him, to think that helping him would somehow make things right. But the risks were enormous. If his enemies found out she was involved, her family could be in grave danger. "I'll think about it," she said finally, standing up. "But you need to understand something, Victor. My boys come first. No amount of money or promises is worth risking their safety. Victor nodded solemnly. I understand. And I wouldn't ask you to do anything that puts them at risk. But remember this. If we don't act, they'll find me eventually. And when they do, they won't care who gets caught in the crossfire. The next morning, Emma woke early, unable to shake the conversation from her mind. She stepped outside onto the porch, breathing in the crisp mountain air as the sun rose over the treetops. The forest looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos brewing within her home. For a moment, she wished she could turn back time, to the days before Victor appeared, when her biggest worry was keeping the bills paid. But deep down, she knew that wasn't an option. Life had thrown her a curveball, and ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. As much as she wanted to protect her family, she also couldn't ignore the fact that Victor needed her. His story was tragic, almost Shakespearean in its complexity, and part of her felt drawn to help him rewrite the ending. By midday, she made her decision. Returning to the cabin, she found Victor sitting at the kitchen table, poring over a damaged USB drive he had retrieved from his coat pocket. It was scratched and dented, but he swore it held the key to unlocking his hidden accounts. I'll help you, Emma said abruptly, startling him. But we do it my way. We stay smart, stay safe, and put my boys first. Deal? Victor looked up, relief washing over his face. Deal, he said, extending his hand. Emma shook it firmly, sealing their agreement. Over the next few hours, they devised a plan. Using clues embedded in the files on the USB drive, they would locate an abandoned server facility deep in the mountains, a place Victor had once used to store encrypted data. From there, they hoped to access the accounts and transfer the funds to a secure location. It was risky, but it was their best shot. As night fell, Emma packed a small bag with essentials, flashlights, matches, a first aid kit, and enough food to last a couple of days. Victor watched her silently, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Thank you, Emma, he said softly, for believing in me. Not many people would. Emma paused, meeting his gaze. Don't thank me yet, she replied. We still have a long road ahead, and if this goes south, I'm holding you accountable. Victor smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. Fair enough. With that, they prepared to leave under the cover of darkness. The journey ahead promised to be perilous, filled with uncertainty and danger. But as Emma locked the door, behind them she felt a strange sense of resolve. Whatever happened next, she knew she was doing the right thing, not just for Victor, but for her family. After all, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest rewards. The journey to the abandoned server facility was nothing short of grueling. Emma and Victor set out under the cover of darkness, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves on the forest floor. The air was cold, and the moonlight filtered weakly through the dense canopy above, casting eerie shadows that danced around them. Emma carried a backpack filled with supplies while Victor clutched the damaged USB drive tightly in his hand, as though it were a lifeline. For the first hour, they walked in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma's mind raced with questions. What if they were walking straight into a trap? What if Victor's enemies were already waiting for them at the facility? She glanced at him occasionally, noticing the tension in his posture and the way his eyes darted constantly toward every sound, every movement in the trees. Despite his injuries, he moved with purpose, driven by a mix of desperation and determination. Finally, unable to bear the quiet any longer, Emma spoke. How far is this place? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Not much farther, Victor replied, his tone clipped. A few more miles, maybe less. It's deep in the woods, far from any roads or trails. That's why I chose it. Emma nodded, though she wasn't entirely reassured. The deeper they went, the more isolated they became. If something went wrong, there would be no one to help them. No cell service, no passing hikers, just miles of wilderness. As they continued, the terrain grew rougher. Steep inclines forced them to climb over rocks and fallen logs, while narrow ravines required careful navigation. At one point, Emma slipped on a patch of moss and nearly tumbled down a slope. But Victor grabbed her arm just in time, steadying her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I'm fine," Emma muttered, brushing dirt off her jeans. "Just watch your step." Victor gave her a small, grateful smile before turning back to the path ahead. For all his wealth and power, or what was left of it, he seemed almost human now, stripped of the arrogance that must have once defined him. Emma found herself softening toward him, despite her lingering doubts. There was a vulnerability about him that made her want to trust him, even though logic screamed otherwise. By the time they reached the outskirts of the facility, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The building loomed. Before them, its windows shattered and walls covered in ivy. It looked like something out of a horror movie, a relic of a bygone era, forgotten by time. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine as they approached cautiously, scanning the area for signs of danger. "This is it," Victor said quietly, his voice tinged with both relief and apprehension. "The servers are still inside, but we'll need to hurry. If anyone's been here recently, they could have tampered with them." Emma nodded, gripping the flashlight in her hand tighter. "Let's go." They entered the facility through a side door that hung loosely on its hinges, creaking ominously as they pushed it open. Inside, the air was damp and musty, carrying the faint smell of rust and decay. The main room was dominated by rows of towering server racks, most of which were either broken or powered down. Dust coated every surface, and the floor was littered with debris, broken cables, empty soda cans, and scraps of paper. Victor immediately got to work, pulling tools from his bag and setting up a makeshift workstation near one of the remaining functional servers. Emma stood guard, her flashlight sweeping across the room as she kept an ear out for any unusual sounds. Every creak of the old building made her jump, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. "How long will this take?" she asked after several minutes of tense silence. "Not long," Victor replied without looking up. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he worked to decrypt the files stored on the USB drive. "But I need you to keep watch. If anyone shows up, we're done for." Emma swallowed hard, nodding again. She hated how vulnerable they were, trapped in this crumbling building with no clear escape route. Still, she forced herself to focus, reminding herself why they were here, not just for Victor, but for her family. Time dragged on agonizingly slow. The sun climbed higher in the sky, streaming through cracks in the ceiling and illuminating the dust particles floating in the air. Emma's legs ached from standing and her stomach growled with hunger, but she refused to complain. Finally, after what felt like hours, Victor let out a triumphant exclamation. "I've got it," he said, spinning around in his chair. "The encryption key, it's intact. We can access the accounts." Emma felt a surge of relief wash over her. "That's great. So what happens now?" Victor hesitated, his expression darkening. "Now comes the hard part. Transferring the funds without triggering any alarms. Whoever's been tracking me will know as soon as I start moving the money." Emma frowned, dread creeping back into her chest. "Can't we just leave it where it is?" "No," Victor said firmly. "If we don't move it, they'll find it, and then they'll come after us again. This is the only way to end this for good." Emma sighed, knowing he was right. As much as she wanted to walk away, leaving the money untouched wasn't an option. They had come too far to turn back now. While Victor worked on transferring the funds, Emma paced nervously around the room, her senses on high alert. She checked the windows repeatedly, scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of movement. Her heart skipped a beat when she thought she saw a shadow dart past one of the broken panes, but upon closer inspection, it turned out to be nothing more than a minute stretched into what felt like eternity. Just as Emma began to think they might actually pull it off, a loud crash echoed through the building, making her spin around in alarm. "What was that?" she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. Victor froze, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "I don't know," he said grimly, "but I don't think we're alone anymore." Before either of them could react, the sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper within the facility. Heavy, deliberate steps that sent chills down Emma's spine. Someone or something was coming for them. The footsteps grew louder, echoing ominously through the abandoned server facility. Each step felt like a countdown to disaster, and Emma's heart pounded so hard she was sure Victor could hear it. She clutched her flashlight tightly, its beam trembling as she aimed it toward the source of the noise. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twist, playing tricks on her mind. "Turn off the screen," Emma hissed at Victor, her voice barely audible. "They'll see the light." Victor hesitated for a split second, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He knew stopping now would mean losing everything, the funds, their chance at freedom. But he also understood that staying hidden was their only hope of survival. With a frustrated growl, he powered down the workstation, plunging the room into near-total darkness. Only the faint glow of dawn seeping through cracks in the walls illuminated their surroundings. Emma pressed herself against the wall beside the doorway, peering cautiously into the hallway beyond. The footsteps were closer now, accompanied by low murmurs, 2 voices, maybe 3. Whoever they weren't alone. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had Victor's enemies tracked them here? Or had someone else stumbled upon the facility by accident? "We need to move," Victor whispered urgently, crouching beside her. "If they find us here, we're done." Emma nodded, though panic clawed at her chest. Moving meant risking exposure, but staying put wasn't an option either. Silently, she gestured for Victor to follow her as she crept toward the back of the room, where a narrow service corridor branched off from the main area. It was cluttered with debris and smelled of mildew, but it offered some cover, and hopefully an escape route. As they slipped into the corridor, the voices grew louder. Emma caught snippets of conversation, though the words were muffled and indistinct. One voice was deep and commanding, while another sounded younger, almost nervous. They weren't shouting, which suggested they were searching methodically rather than blindly tearing through the building. "They know we're here," Victor muttered under his breath, his eyes darting around frantically. "Probably followed our tracks." Emma didn't respond. Instead, she focused on putting one foot in front of the other, careful not to make a sound. Every creak of the floorboards made her flinch, and she winced when a loose piece of metal clanged softly beneath Victor's shoe. Both froze, holding their breath as the footsteps outside paused. "Did you hear that?" one of the voices asked, sharply. It was the commanding one, laced with suspicion. Emma's pulse quickened. She glanced at Victor, whose face was pale but resolute. Without speaking, they both knew what they had to do. Keep moving. Slowly, painstakingly, they continued, down the corridor until they reached a rusted metal door marked exit. Emma pushed it gently, wincing as the hinges groaned in protest. Beyond it lay a flight of stairs leading down to the basement level of the facility. "This way," she whispered, gesturing for Victor to follow. They descended the stairs as quietly as possible, the air growing colder and damper with each step. At the bottom, they found themselves in a labyrinth of storage rooms and utility tunnels, most of which were locked or blocked by fallen debris. But one door stood slightly ajar, revealing a dimly lit passageway that led deeper underground. Emma hesitated, unsure whether heading further into the maze was wise. Before she could decide, however, the sound of heavy boots echoed overhead. Their pursuers had entered the corridor above them. "There's nowhere to run," the commanding voice called out, dripping with menace. "Come out now and we won't hurt you." Emma exchanged a glance with Victor. Neither believed the promise. Whoever these people were, they weren't interested in negotiation. They wanted results, and they wouldn't hesitate to use force to get them. "We have to keep going," Victor urged, his voice barely audible. "There might be another exit down here." Reluctantly, Emma nodded, and they slipped into the passageway, closing the door behind them as silently as possible. The tunnel stretched ahead, lined with exposed pipes and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly. It smelled of oil and decay, and the walls were damp to the touch. As they moved, Emma noticed markings on the walls, arrows and numbers painted in faded red paint. Someone had used this place before, perhaps as a maintenance route or emergency exit. After several tense minutes, they came across a junction where the tunnel split in two directions. To the left, the path sloped upward, suggesting it led back toward the surface. To the right, it descended even deeper, vanishing into shadow. Emma hesitated again, torn between seeking daylight and avoiding capture. "The left path," Victor said firmly, pointing toward the incline. "We can't afford to get trapped underground." Emma agreed, and they began climbing. The incline was steep and uneven, forcing them to navigate carefully to avoid slipping. Just as they reached the top, they heard a metallic clang behind them, the sound of the door they'd closed being yanked open. "They're coming," Emma whispered, panic rising in her throat. Without waiting for Victor's response, she broke into a jog, her flashlight bouncing wildly as she hurried along the tunnel. Ahead, she spotted a sliver of natural light filtering through a grate in the ceiling. A way out. "Up there," she exclaimed, pointing to the grate. Victor nodded, sprinting to catch up with her. Together, they pushed against the heavy metal, covering, grunting with effort until it finally gave way with a loud screech. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Emma hoisted herself up first, then reached down to help Victor climb out after her. They emerged into a secluded clearing surrounded by dense trees, far enough from the facility to offer some semblance of safety. For now. Gasping for breath, they collapsed onto the ground, listening intently for any sign of pursuit. For a moment, all was silent except for the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. "We made it," Emma said finally, her voice trembling with relief. "For now, anyway." Victor nodded, his expression grim. "But we're not safe yet. They'll regroup and come after us again. We need to figure out our next move." Emma sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "What about the money? Did you manage to transfer it?" Victor shook his head. "Not all of it. I got partway through, but I had to shut it down when they showed up. Enough to buy us some time, though." Emma frowned, disappointment mingling with frustration. "So we're back to square one?" "Not quite," Victor replied, pulling the USB drive from his pocket. "This still holds the key to everything. If we can find another secure location, we can finish the job. But we'll need to stay ahead of them." Emma stared at him, weighing their options. Staying on the run wasn't sustainable, not with her boys depending on her. Yet turning back wasn't an option either. Whatever happened next, she realized, would define not just Victor's fate, but hers as well. "Fine," she said finally, standing up and brushing dirt off her jeans. "Let's go. But this time we do things my way. No more risks unless absolutely necessary." Victor smiled faintly, admiration flickering in his eyes. "Agreed. You've earned that much." With renewed determination, they set off into the woods, leaving the abandoned facility and their pursuers behind. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear. Together, they stood a fighting chance. The days that followed were a blur of movement and tension. Emma and Victor stayed off the grid, moving from one remote location to another, always careful to avoid towns or roads where they might be spotted. They relied on Emma's knowledge of the forest, sticking to hidden trails and camping in secluded clearings. At night, they huddled around small fires, eating canned food scavenged from abandoned cabins and listening for any signs of pursuit. The constant fear of discovery weighed heavily on them both, but it also forged an unspoken bond, a shared determination to survive. Victor spent much of their downtime poring over the damaged USB drive, trying to piece together the fragments of data he hadn't been able to transfer at the server facility. Each time he cracked open his laptop, Emma watched anxiously, praying that this would be the moment they finally unlocked the rest of the funds. But progress was slow, and frustration mounted with every setback. "We're running out of time," Victor admitted one evening as they sat by a crackling fire. His face was etched with exhaustion, dark circles underlining his eyes. "If we don't finish soon, they'll find us again. And next time, we might not be so lucky." Emma nodded, her gaze fixed on the flames. She knew he was right. Their pursuers weren't amateurs. They were professionals who wouldn't give up easily. Every hour they delayed brought them closer to being caught. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at stake here than just money. This wasn't just about Victor saving himself. It was about redemption. "What happens after we get the money?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. "You've said before that you want to disappear, but what does that mean? Are you just going to run forever?" Victor hesitated, his hands resting on his knees. For a long time he didn't answer, staring into the fire as though searching for words. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with regret. "I've done terrible things, Emma," he confessed. "Things I can't undo. I thought hiding the money would protect me, but all it did was make me a target. If I take it now and vanish, I'll just be repeating the same mistakes, living for myself, thinking only about survival. And maybe I don't want that anymore." Emma studied him carefully, seeing the weight of years' worth of guilt written across his face. She had suspected there was more to his story than greed or ambition, but hearing him admit it aloud changed everything. Despite his flaws, despite the danger he brought into her life, she saw a man who wanted to change, not because he had to, but because he needed to. "So what are you saying?" she asked gently. "That you'd give it back? All of it?" Victor nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "It doesn't belong to me, not really. Some of it came from investors I betrayed, others from deals I shouldn't have made. Keeping it won't fix anything. It'll just keep the cycle going. Maybe returning it could start to make things right." Emma felt a surge of admiration, mixed with disbelief. It was a bold move, one that carried enormous risks. Giving the money back meant exposing himself to the authorities, risking prison, or worse. Yet part of her believed he was making the right choice. Redemption wasn't easy, but it was worth fighting for. "Then let's do it," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "But we do it smart. No half measures. Once the funds are transferred, you turn yourself in. You tell them everything. The truth about where the money came from, who helped you hide it, everything. That's the only way to end this." Victor stared at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You'd still help me? Even knowing what I've done?" Emma smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "I'm not helping you for your sake, Victor. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do for everyone involved, including my boys." The final leg of their journey took them to a small internet cafe in a distant town, far enough from the mountains to feel safe. For now. Disguised in borrowed clothes and baseball caps, they slipped inside unnoticed, renting a private booth at the back. While Emma kept watch near the entrance, Victor worked quickly, typing furiously as he accessed the encrypted accounts one last time. This time, there were no interruptions, no footsteps echoing down hallways, no voices calling out threats. Just the steady hum of computers and the occasional ring of a phone at the front desk. Within an hour, Victor had completed the transfers, routing the billions back to their rightful owners. As the confirmation messages popped up on the screen, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "It's done," he said softly, turning to Emma. "All of it." Emma nodded, relief washing over her like a wave. "Now it's your turn." Victor didn't argue. He knew she was right. Gathering his belongings, he stood up and walked toward the door, pausing briefly to look back at her. "Thank you, Emma, for everything." She gave him a small, sad smile. "Good luck, Victor. Don't waste this chance." With that, he stepped outside, disappearing into the crowd. Emma watched him go, her heart heavy but hopeful. She didn't know what the future held for him, whether justice would truly prevail, but she believed he deserved the opportunity to try. Weeks later, news broke that Victor Langston had resurfaced, voluntarily surrendering to authorities and cooperating fully with investigations. The media hailed him as a reformed figure, someone who had chosen accountability over escape. Meanwhile, Emma returned home to her sons, carrying with her a newfound sense of purpose and a modest trust fund Victor had arranged for her family before turning himself in. Life wasn't perfect, but it was better. Her boys had new opportunities, and Emma found solace in knowing she had played a part in setting something right. As she stood on her porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning, but from choosing to do the right thing, even when it's hard. And deep down she hoped Victor felt the same.